And I'm going to take away the sound of people coming in, and then we'll be good to go. All right, so we're recording right now. Good afternoon for those who've joined us. Thank you for coming here today. This is our first 2023 Industry Insights panel that we're doing. And it's a new and exciting career pathway that I'm very excited to learn about. The goal with these Industry Insights session, and next week we're going to be doing UX research as well, is to provide our students and you with valuable information and empower you to make informed decisions about your career path. So I think we hope that you leave today's session with greater clarity and a sort of a proactive approach to your job search strategy. So thank you for just taking the time to be here today. We have Doctors Matt Sherman and Joe Sanchez, who have taken time out of their own work schedule to come chat with us today. I can't thank you enough for doing this. In today's session, what I'll do is I'll kickstart the interview with our guests, but I do encourage all of you who've joined and are curious about this career path to ask questions without hesitation about how Matt and Joe do what they do, why they do it, how they do it. Use this as like an informational interview opportunity. So and be as active as you want. And so let's start with Matt. Matt, you have a PhD in Germanic studies with a focus on Central European literature and intellectual history. You also taught and then transitioned into learning and development. Can you share a little bit with us very broadly, what is learning and development?
Yeah, so learning and development, first of all, welcome everyone. It's amazing to be here. I love events like this. Along my journey, both academic and kind of post-academic professional, I've had lots and lots of help. So it's wonderful to be able to kind of pay it forward even a little bit. Learning and development, it kind of depends on corporate structures. It's typically housed under some type of talent management department. So learning and development really is all about setting up employees for success, ensuring that they have the tools and the resources and the trainings to work effectively, to work with meaning and purpose, and to be kind of tapped into to the business. So there's a lot of kind of components that are there. Learning can be considered a little bit differently from development. L&D is then also kind of typically tapped into other things like employee engagement, succession planning, and other kind of talent initiatives. But maybe that's a brief introduction to learning and development.
Perfect. Thank you. I think that was a good snapshot from your perspective. Joe, nice to speak with you again after a long time. And I know you have a long career spanning academia, government, pharma, and you've been a scientist and a mentor. And right now you lead L&D at Merck. What does that entail?
Yeah, so in this context, in the biopharmaceutical setting, there's really three pillars of L&D that we focus on. One is really its compliance training. So what are the core competencies and core technical skills that you need to perform your function? We're on the line here with many scientists and engineers, but you can think about what it might take to do your science or do your engineering under perfect control. I think that's the differentiator between L&D in the academic sector or government sector, and then here in private pharma. So there's a training piece for sure, core competencies. And then the learning piece is then, again, like Matt was saying, how do we stretch you and grow you? How do you cross skill? How do you upskill? Depth and breadth, so that we're adding more and more value to the company as your competencies grow and develop. And then the last piece is development. So again, think of it as employee mobility. What are those resume builders? What are the professional skills, the transferable skills, whether it's negotiation skills or influencing without authority, communication, decision-making, basic business acumen, managerial acumen, professional acumen, et cetera. So it really is, and for me, it's the entire learner journey from the time you are recruited until the time you leave. We want you to be the absolute best version of yourself possible, because that returns value back to the company.
And how is this different, Joe, from, say, organizational development? Folks that have sort of a background in psychology might go into organizational development or industrial psychology. how does learning and development differ from that?
So I think it would be sort of tactical versus strategic, right? So if you're operating on the ground floor, we talked about, again, technical competencies. What does it take to perform your function perfectly and flawlessly every time and develop as an individual? Those other disciplines are going to feed into now, how do we move forward organizationally, culturally?
Okay.
Matt touched on it. Like, how does this relate to talent attraction, talent retention, time to competency, time to promotion? How does this feed then reputation for the company, to sort of make that talent attraction and retention frictionless? How do we incorporate our values, our principles, our behaviors, our attitudes? So that, again, that's just another level of L&D that you might experience.
Okay, I think we'll get into the day-to-day and the week-to-week in a second. But Matt, I just wanted to rewind a little bit in your career trajectory, because you did teaching, you did the whole PhD as a humanist, and then you one day made a decision, this is what I want to do. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you were contemplating your next steps and how you landed on learning and development? Like, where did you even learn about it?
Yeah, I think even when I began graduate school in 2009, conversations were still everywhere for alt-ac and kind of the needs there. Although I was definitely, for the majority of my graduate career, all in on the academic route, I was always curious about where else I might end up. I knew that there was still a chance that I would be outside of academia. So yeah, I mean, in, I guess, 2020, fall of 2020, I was teaching at Emory, had a big move just due to COVID, and thought it was a really good time to look at my other options. So that fall was brutal because I was teaching while working in a corporate job full time that I had landed. But in terms of kind of what I was looking for, I did know that I wanted to avoid higher education. I think it kind of really depends on where you are, but at least for humanists, we usually don't have, when we go alt-ac, we're usually just still within academia somewhere. And I was kind of aware of the fact that one of the things I love about corporate America is the structures, focus on management, focus on learning and development, and things that are maybe a little bit more difficult to find and manage in a university. So I was looking for things that would have been in my wheelhouse, anything educational. So I was looking at government jobs. Again, my wife and I moved to DC, so I had kind of a lot here, but I was looking at educational jobs, research type positions through the government, anything offered. You could imagine educational programming within like the Smithsonian and stuff like that. But learning and development made a lot of sense. It was just through some research that I found it as a field, and talent management kind of more broadly conceived was where I started. And now I'm slightly more narrowly focused on learning and development. But it was all about, for me, when I was looking to transition, it was all about how do I get my foot in the door and what made the most sense, not in terms of what I bring to the table, but in terms of the types of things that interest me. So I was lucky, even as a graduate student, to have, in comparative terms, a lot of experience in designing courses, teaching courses, doing assessment on the program level and the department level. So I had a lot of experience that I kind of knew would be helpful for L&D.
Yeah, I do want to touch on that. I think that we'll have interest in learning more about how your PhD program and your training sort of trained you or prepared you for transitioning into this. But I'll get back to Joe and ask you, Joe, what do you do in your typical week, in your typical day? I think day is too short, but your typical week in your role, what does that look like?
Yeah, so I'm privileged to lead a team of 30 learning and development professionals that are responsible and accountable for supporting the training and education for thousands of vaccine operations personnel here at the site. And so I would say, first and foremost, there's a lot of leadership. for sure. How do we enable the success of our team? How do we enable the success of others? So I do invest a lot in them to ensure that they can bring their best self, their whole self, their authentic self to work and perform at a very high level. I sit on the senior leadership team, so I'm also accountable for leading the, again, the campus with my colleagues in different functional areas. And I also have a lot of work that we would call above site. And so my remit is also providing strategic direction for the enterprise level or the divisional level as to where does LND go from here? Like, what does the future hold? And to make sure that we have the right systems and tools, capabilities, and technologies to move us into that future. So yeah, that's it's a lot of meetings.
I can imagine.
It's a lot of meetings, but I'm also grateful that I have an amazing team to delegate a lot of other work too, for sure.
Okay. How did you feel like your PhD training and your years and years of experience in academia, government, and other sort of pharmaceutical companies prepared you for this moment? What is the connection between someone who has a PhD? I know you also have an MBA, so I'm sure some of the training came from you doing an MBA too. So two-part question. One, how did your PhD prepare you for this? And two, do you recommend people get their MBA to be able to lead teams of 30 and so on?
Yeah, good question. So on the academic side, I always thought, I spent over 20 years at the bench myself. My favorite part though was the mentorship, right? Cultivating young scientists, bringing them along and preparing them for what comes next in their careers. That's like a drug. And so then when I went to the dark side and then left to go and stay home full time with my kids and teach full time at the collegiate level. That was an opportunity to scale that mentorship, scale the advising, have a greater impact over this next generation of scientists coming along. And then I went to operations and in the pharmaceutical sector because they were trying to put two things together. One, someone who understood adult learning principles, and adult learning theory with someone who spoke the sciences, right? And so that's the combination of those two things is what made me competitive for sort of crossing over into pharma, where they were trying to get away from the concept of corporate trainers, right?
Yeah.
So I would say the PhD prepare me, well, certainly mentorship, critical thinking, independent thinking, and creativity for sure. But again, I didn't stay in the hard sciences track ultimately. But yeah, I would definitely credit that training to at least preparing me to think. Right, it's a degree in reasoning, so I think it accomplished that. The MBA, so it was maybe 2017. I was in a symposia, and there were some leaders up on the stage talking about what they do, and in that moment, I'm thinking, well, if I stay in the private sector, I certainly want to track towards something like a chief learning officer, chief talent officer. Okay, if I go to the academic track, then I want to be in a position of leadership at, maybe a vice provost or something. And what I noticed is that those leaders that were speaking were both business people. Like, they had a core foundation in business, and I knew to be competitive for those roles, I would need to have the same acumen. And so I was very lucky to take advantage of a tuition reimbursement program with my previous company to earn that MBA. Is it necessary? No.
Thank you. And Matt, did you, what I'm noticing Joe say, and I'm able to relate to this as well. If you like mentorship, education, but not in higher ed or alt act, if you like to help people become sort of their best versions of themselves, reach their full potential, if you substitute students with employees, that seems to be like a common thread. Like you're not helping students anymore, but you're helping employees in the same manner. So did you feel the same way, like you could translate and transpose some of the values and fulfillment that you got from teaching and mentoring others in your own program and your experience to what you do right now? I just want to help folks make that connection, that it's not all so distinct, they're all interconnected. So can you tell us a little bit about how it aligns for you?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. I get asked that a lot. Joe had a great comment about the dark side. Certainly in the humanities, I think there is this sense about just, you know, the yucky, unethical kind of corporate spaces, right? I think maybe I mentioned earlier, part of my desire to leave academia was just a disillusionment that I think a lot of folks are encountering and talking about now. All that to say, the values and the goals of the humanities, the same are really present in HR. The same are really present. I think Joe made a great point, really in any great business from top to bottom. But I have found that in HR, in corporate America, and in learning and development, I genuinely feel like across the board, we're a lot more serious about those goals. I feel like we really are not just asking the questions and kind of problematizing, but it's like, what can we do? And I personally love that. And so I feel like that passion is really driven through a lot of purpose in the L&D space. So certainly there's a couple of kind of small elements that, you know, I gave up by leaving academia, but I feel like for the most part, all of those are present. And in many ways, I'm even more fulfilled where I am.
Okay, we'll tap into that fulfillment piece in a second. Megan, yes, feel free to ask a question now. I was going to do it halfway through, but it's okay if you have a question now. Megan, you had one. Did you want to unmute and ask?
Sure. I didn't realize we were going to be on camera and getting recorded, so I was trying to maybe look more presentable, but here we are. So I have a question about sort of the content knowledge or industry knowledge. So I still feel like I don't fully understand what learning and development, like what you actually do and what you're actually teaching. I'm getting my doctorate in education, so like I certainly know adult learning and I know how to teach lots of things, but I have no private, like any kind of industry experience outside of education. So I'm trying to understand, like, do you have to be a scientist and actually like know the content that you would be going to teach, or is it something else?
Good question. We'll start with Joe and then Matt can give his perspective too.
It's a great question. I'm going to knock this one out of the park. So it's a great question. It's kind of a black box, right? You're like, what's going on in there? How does one do their job, and what are your accountabilities, responsibilities? So I would say it's just for my team. Like, we have a responsibility for like orientation and bringing folks into the business and into the company. And so when you think of what the cultural pieces are, we facilitate the delivery of that content. We also are obligated to teach things like good manufacturing practices, good documentation practices, good clinical practices, good laboratory practices, et cetera. So what are the regulatory requirements in education and training that, you know, we're accountable for? Any health authority can come and ensure that we're delivering that content and that it's effective. And so we're also facilitating a lot of that as well. So in some cases, yes, a learning and development professional would be delivering content, but it's probably at a very high level. It could be theoretical, it could be principles. It's not too deep, but we do that. Now, the other model we use is what's called a subject matter expert model. And so now we're taking true subject matter experts from the business, and we're bringing them in and turning them into the best educator they can be to then deliver their content at the right depth, right? So that's a second model that we use. The third model we use is called a hub model. And so within the company network, can we develop centers of excellence? And learners will travel to those hubs to get their core competency training or learnings and education. So we have a hub model. The fourth model we use is an external or global model. So do we bring outside experts in? Do we send our folks somewhere where a professional society or that expertise is resident outside the company or outside the area? And is that how we're transferring knowledge or building skills and competencies? So all of those things are in play, all of them. And we manage all of that activity.
And Matt?
Yeah, I think Joe summarized that really well. It will, part of the difficulty in the discipline of L&D is the fact that it will just depend on the business. And it will also just depend on where the business is at any given moment in terms of to what extent is it going to be more internally facilitated, externally facilitated? To what extent are you leaning more towards subject matter experts or L&D, folks actually kind of facilitating trainings and things? But I think that that's a really great summary. In general, I think one thing to add to is, I'm in strategic advisory firm, PR. And so we, like many businesses, are very hard skill based. So making sure that folks have the skills to do their job from a day to day. And so that can depend on the unit that you're in, that can depend on the level that you're at, right? But it's kind of, training is very much this balance between onboarding, as Joe was talking about, and then maybe things that are more like upskilling, things that are kind of happening still on that getting folks up to speed kind of level. And then development is going to be something maybe a little bit beyond that. So typically programs like leadership development and stuff like that. So we'll have a lot of programs that are hard skills. Those are either going to be like the bread and butter stuff for, okay, the folks at my firm that are client facing, which is the majority of us, they're doing a lot of the same things. So what are the basic skills at more or less junior level? What are those skills when they're kind of +1 at the mid-level and +2 at the more senior levels, right? So there's that. And then I think it's also, yeah, things are shifting. When I think about my own firm, everything is kind of in flux. And so we also use a lot of subject matter experts. I think businesses, when they can, they're leaning on their own people to handle a lot of that and not have to kind of constantly go to external trainers. So that's definitely something that we're looking for. But I do think that in general, one of the things that L&D tends to understand really well is we are looking for, and we're very much all about skills and competencies. I think that we know, and especially those of us with a graduate education in our background, know that sure, there's a learning curve, but that information very often can be just kind of filled in. But the skills and competencies that we have, those are really critical. So now I'm in a different place where Joe is working with, subject matter experts in a very true and disciplined sense. I'm in a little bit of a different space where I'm a little bit more of the opinion where I just think have folks that know how to teach, are great facilitators, and I don't care if they know it or not. I can teach them whatever the content is. I need really great educators. But again, it depends on what we're trying to really achieve.
Yeah, and Megan, I think what you're expressing there is like, I don't have prior industry knowledge in this space to transition into that space. Matt, you didn't either. You went in with a PhD and you said, I have these transferable skills that we often use, and I'm going to apply those transferable skills into my learning and development job, right? So what were those transferable skills that you took along with you in your resume, for example, when you applied?
Great question. I think there may be on a couple of different levels. For me, there were the basic transferable skills that are immediately usable in L&D. One is teaching, right? Facilitating. Another is, of course, designing, right? Which comes from just knowing how learning happens, knowing how, curriculum can be built, how it can be scaled, learning arcs, all types of, all of that stuff. And then also assessment. I think one thing you can keep in mind if you're transitioning into any corporate space, data is really, really critical. And in fact, it's a phenomenal transferable skill because a lot of L&D departments still are remind me of my former colleagues in the humanities. They're resistant. They don't want to use it. They don't want to be there. They're a little bit intimidated or insecure about what that data could mean. So any level of assessment that you can do, whether that's assessing a workshop, assessing performance, assessing a program, assessing L&D in general, all of that is really, really helpful. Some of the kind of basic skills that you probably all have: research, the ability to ask really good questions, strong communication skills, project management skills. Yeah, all of those are great transferable skills. I also think about maybe narrativizable skills, right? So to what extent do you have an approach to learning and development? So hearing Joe kind of talk about what learning and development means to him is a wonderful story about the kind of human element there. So having good stories there. Personally as well, to give it an example, one of the things that I lean on a lot and talk about a lot, my background and my work in European studies broadly, really, and speaking multiple European languages, is cultural competency. Cultural competency is a direct skill that employers are looking for, especially if it's a multinational company of any sort. Because if you can speak the language, if you understand the cultures, that is a huge bonus. But also the competency more broadly conceived, the ability to kind of understand where demarcations are, how to kind of, build bridges, cross bridges, how to occupy those in between or third spaces. That is a hugely transferable skill that kind of I brought with me from my background.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Matt. Joe, does learning and development fall under HR? What is the relationship with working with the HR and these big?
Not necessarily. I was just typing an answer into the chat. So each organization is going to be different. And so how they define learning and development, what do they mean training? Do they mean learning? Do they mean talent? Do they mean capability? Do they mean, right, or organizational design? So each one is going to define it differently, and that might influence where it reports in. You do see L&D departments report in through HR. I've also seen them report, again, in my sector, it would be appropriate to perhaps report into quality. I've also seen times where it reports into supply chain. I mean, it's over there somewhere. It doesn't, it just depends. So I think there's some flexibility there, but not always HR. I do find if you're looking for jobs and you key in on learning and development, you will find it embedded with a lot of HR responsibilities, or the assumption is that HR has learning and development as a core competency, right? So you will find them associated, but not necessarily connected.
Any other questions about really understanding what learning and development entails? Thank you, Megan. That brought additional clarity to what it is. So we'll move into sort of how to transition in a second, but Aaron has a question.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I guess I have a similar question to Megan's, although maybe it's more idiosyncratic to me. What's the relation to, say, instructional design, or you see like learning experience design? And I'll just give a quick story about where this question is coming from too, because I applied for, so I teach, I design courses, right? I teach students, I teach adults. I've taught in a variety of contexts, but when I applied for this learning experience designer job, they wanted to see work product from me, and nothing that I gave them that was recognizable. So they're like, where's your, do you have anything else? Where's your something that I can recognize and know, see that you can do this job? So talking about my transferable skills in that case was not enough. So I actually didn't get to the hiring manager, but the hiring manager was the one asking for more. So the recruiter was kind of on my side, and she was like, I think this person has the transferable skills. So I don't know, it's kind of a multi-part question. One, what is the relationship between these sort of adjacent bodies of knowledge? Like, I was seeing instructional design, people who were trained in that as a kind of like gatekeeping for me, you know, because I wasn't trained in that, even though I'm like, I can do that, you know, I know this, I just don't necessarily speak the language and have recognizable things. Are there similar gatekeeping type things in, and maybe we don't think of it as gatekeeping, but in learning and development, sort of adjacent bodies of knowledge? And then I guess this goes to the next step of the conversation, but like, how do we think about presenting work product that would be recognizable? Especially I'm interested in hearing Matt's experience with you know, the hiring managers that you talked to. Did they know what PhDs do? Did they know, you know, did they have a PhD themselves, and like what kind of things did they ask for? Sorry, I know that's a rambly question, but.
Good question, Aaron. Joe, we'll start with you and then Matt.
Sure. So as Aaron, as I'm listening to you, I got one very solid image in my head, which is the learning pyramid. And so if we could just walk through that learning pyramid together, I'll try to call out maybe the things you experienced and maybe the things that the employers are looking for. And so again, at the top is going to be the least valuable thing you could possibly create for your learners, which is instructor-led training, right? That's that, you know, you remember college, right? It's a lot of just in case learning and not just in time, death by PowerPoint, right? And so if your work product includes death by PowerPoint, that's not gonna fly anymore, which is a good thing. You come down and then it's reading, right? And so if it's a reading element, that's also not value add for your learners or your instructors. You keep coming down, you talk about the need for instructional design as a competency to deliver the e-learning and the micro-learning, et cetera, right? Better, but still passive, right? So you keep coming, gamification, all of that is in that level. Keep coming down that pyramid. Now you're talking about curriculum design and learner experience. You're talking about workshops. You're talking about discussion groups. You're talking about case studies. This is a reinforcement stage, right? Where you have active learning taking place. This is something you're definitely going to want to have in your portfolio. And then the most powerful teaching way, teaching is the most powerful way to learn. And so here we really push the business to accept that and embrace that. The most powerful way to learn is to teach. So how are we setting the expectation for learning? And then how are we putting people in a position to teach others, transfer knowledge, capture that transfer, capture the value it is, for the learner, showing improved proficiency, improved performance, all those things that go into that teaching element. So I don't know if that hurts or helps, but what you're describing, there might be some technical things that you do, but I would say to really show your value is to understand that pyramid and where you'd like to focus taking an organization. I'll shut up, let Matt talk.
That was, I mean, Joe, you're an educator. So, I mean, that was very apparent. So thank you. Aaron, that was helpful, right? And I'll switch over to Matt and then have Matt answer the second part of your question.
Yeah, another challenging question, and I sympathize. There is this question of how did you make the initial transition? It really is like once you get your foot in the door, you're where you need to be, but getting your foot in the door is very, very challenging. So I just think of some things even like that I did. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but when I first started, I left PhD off my resume. I just kind of left some of that out. I just said I had a master's degree. I even left my second master's degree off. And then I was still talking about all the teaching that I was doing, but to kind of answer one of the questions, which is, does the majority of folks out there understand what PhD is? No. So it's really kind of, for me, I was just like, I was a university instructor, I have a master's, no one really kind of knows. And so part of the challenge is, as you're trying to figure out, making it look like what they're used to seeing. And this is the perennial problem in being on the job market, right? Is it just comes down to how you look on paper. And so you're gonna look odd. And so how do you kind of correct for that on paper? And then how do you adjust for that in the interview process? Although I'm happy that no one ever asked me to like see actual work. For my current job, I did do a teaching demo. I was really happy that they asked me to do that, because I thought I can do that. But what you can show is, again, I think if you even drafted something along the lines of kind of what Joe is talking about, where even if it's maybe for a course, a unique course, multiple courses, how you kind of maybe built in some experiential learning and stuff like that, you know, with an outline, here were the learning objectives, and kind of showing that you can kind of reverse engineer and back build and do all of that. And then, you know, what did it look like? How did you measure success? What did that look like? So I don't know if there's something that you can potentially kind of draft for that to make that at least be physical and beautiful and maybe make sense to them. I could imagine that kind of working, but yeah, I think, and maybe this question of kind of what does also an instructional designer do? Again, I think it kind of depends. Very often, an instructional designer is often going to be at a very large company, and they're going to be kind of behind the scenes building and then passing it off to someone else, or behind the scenes in the sense of creating those e-learnings, literally creating it, right? So it would be different than, you know, they would kind of pass it off maybe to a facilitator. But again, a lot of L&D practitioners are going to be doing everything. So they're going to be kind of doing the instructional design. But I think Joe makes a really good point, knowing some of the models and talking about that. So, you know, he mentioned the learning pyramid. I think about things like the Kirkpatrick model for evaluation, and kind of just having some of that in your back pocket and being able to say, you know, these are the models that I used here. I use them for the following reasons. That will be really helpful, and that will be more kind of speaking their language.
Matt, do you recommend folks leave the PhD out? I suppose it's different for Joe. I think your PhD background and your government pharmaceutical background is of value to Merck, of course. But Matt, what do you think now that you've been through the whole job search process? Should people leave it out? Should they keep it in?
The PhD has so much cachet, it really can't be you know, overspoken. I think you probably want it on there, but it really depends. When I got into L&D, it was, my foot in the door was literally entry level. So applying for entry level jobs for a lot of us is probably your best bet. I'm a model where I started entry level. I had some very quick promotions because obviously I'm brought in and I'm punching above my weight class because I bring a lot more to the table. And pretty soon I'm in more of a leadership position. But part of why I left the PhD off was I was nervous that because I'm applying directly for these entry-level jobs, is a hiring manager going to say, I'm not bringing in, you know, a secretary with a PhD. But I think it could go in a number of directions there. And certainly if you're entering into a field where that expertise is needed or, you know, rewarded, then definitely. So have a sense of that. But I do recommend oftentimes that you might have to think about something lower on the totem pole and really paying your dues. And maybe you want to consider leaving the PhD off. I did, but I think it's a toss-up.
And it depends on, I suppose, on the organization and the organization size, and if there are other PhDs sort of at the organizational level as well. So I think it will depend on the job.
Yeah, and I also, my first foot in the door was with a multinational, but a German company. Of course, I speak German and know that really well, but that's also a title-driven business. I went back and forth. The hiring manager was American, not German, but it was one of those, as soon as I was hired on, then, you know, I even had PhD in my signature on my emails and stuff. It held a lot of cachet.
And we often talk about the importance of networking, using LinkedIn, connecting with people. How much of that did you do that's helped you transition, in addition to simply putting your resume out there? Matt first and then Joe.
It's huge. And I think that the best way to think about networking is really thinking about it as having strong relationships and thinking about it in the long term. When I was first making the transition, I definitely had some help, but when I was then moving from my first job to my current job, I leaned on my network. I literally am at a business where someone from my network worked, we connected, they put in a great word for me. So it really can't be understated. It's really, really helpful. LinkedIn is a great tool. You will see all the jobs that are posted. Sometimes the recruiter is even listed there. There's a conversation we have about whether you should have a premium account to kind of reach out. I think more often than not, that doesn't work, but sometimes it really does work. But yeah, I think absolutely your relationship, your network is going to be critical. So even if it's not something that works right away, you should definitely, get that figured out.
You're validating a lot of what we talk about at Hopkins is get that LinkedIn account. So I'm glad you said that. Joe, you have so many years of experience. Did you also need the networking, or because your resume speaks for itself, you just applied?
No, gosh, no. You need the network for sure. I would say to break in, to break through, it was a brute force effort for sure. You know, but again, once you get in and you start to meet people, learn the organization, building your network, watering it, feeding it is the single most important thing you can possibly do. Going out socially, understanding where people hang out professionally, getting part of those groups is critical. It's your network that's going to open the door for you. It's your network that's going to create the next opportunity for you. And I'd say it this way. It's not it's not what you know, and it's not who you know. It's who knows you. Okay? Because they're going to have visibility to an opportunity, and they're going to associate it with you. They can be reaching out to you directly, okay, to let you know, or that's going to be the person who's going to take your application and put it in front of the hiring manager versus being lost in the ether somewhere. Okay. So I'll co-sign everything Matt said. It's critically important. Even if you're not comfortable, even if you're introverted by nature, it doesn't matter. You've got to work on it. You've got to do it. It will make all the difference.
Agreed.
Yep. And academia is no different.
No different.
It's all about relationships and relationship building and visibility. I think that's what LinkedIn provides, is that opportunity to be visible.
Yep. And I would also just add that relational element, treat it as such. So also be looking for ways that you can help the people that are in your network as well. That's relationship building.
Yeah, and even if you don't know someone, even reaching out, people, well, can I cold call? In this case, I think you can sometimes. You would be surprised how willing people are to invest time with you and to give back and to help others. So if there's someone with an amazing sounding job and you're just curious and you want to do an informational, reach out. You'll be surprised. You'll get a good response.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? I have a couple of questions in the last 10 minutes or so. Anything in the chat box that I missed? Okay, so let's say that we have people here who are in their first years and we have people here in their fourth years. of their PhD program or their doctoral program, what are some steps they can take now while they still have time before they complete to build up any gaps on their resume in order to make the transition easy? Something that you wished you knew when you were applying for these sorts of roles, Matt?
I think one is anything that's beneficial for your CV, meaning your academic CV, can be helpful. And what I mean here is diversify your CV. So if you have teaching experience and you've taught, you know, a number of, so let's say in my instance, I taught a lot of language courses. Then I started teaching literature courses. Then I started teaching film courses. First it was 19th century stuff. Later it was 20th century stuff. So if as much as possible, you can kind of diversify the types of things that you're teaching and finding then extensions for that type of programming. Can you run, you know, I don't know, whether it's stuff for kids, whether it's just departmental service and offerings. I taught literature at a prison, actually. You know, can you have some really great examples in your back pocket that are going to be significant and meaningful, but show that you have this breadth? I've taught kids and teen, high school, I've taught college, I've taught older adults, I've taught the incarcerated, right? And so, you know, how can you kind of diversify that? And again, that's just helpful in general. But then for me, I was lucky to also be looking for like real world experience. I got a job as an assistant editor for a top journal in my field. And so all of that liaising and project management and using trackers, all of that stuff that is like, you might not have experience doing, are there ways that you can do that? And oftentimes it's probably going to be through that type of more service-oriented work, most likely. But yeah, find some ways to be able to say, I have done work that's comparable to the real world. I was lucky to have a couple of those. Another was, I was the coordinator for German. And so that meant that I was leading a team, a diverse team, graduate students and professors. And so, you know, can you kind of demonstrate leadership, right? So think again more about the frameworks that are existing in the world that you're trying to get into, and how is that really talked about? And then being able to narrativize what you've done within those terms, that's going to be really helpful.
Additional thoughts to that?
Yeah, sure. So the two things that came to mind, you know, again, as you prepare to start applying and thinking about what your next move might be, I'd go back to the informationals again, growing your network and doing a lot of informationals, getting a lot of information, because there's really no way to describe the number of opportunities that are available to you until you get in, and then you see like, oh my goodness, I can go in all these different directions. So talk to a lot of people. If you can, between now and the time you're considering your next move. The other thing is the experiential piece. You can't get a job without experience. You can't get experience without a job. You're educating yourself. You're in training. But what is going to be that real world experience that you're gonna be able to leverage? If you don't have it, you need to get it. And so I would say, even though you might be a full-time trainee, you look for the co-op opportunities, internship opportunities, shadowing, apprenticeship. We have programs that are designed for postgraduates. We have these on-ramps, whether it's additional graduate education, whether it's postdoctoral training. Again, think about, you know, industry postdoc and professional postdoc and professional graduate programs. We have them. They're available. Look for those opportunities, because then now you're in the, you know, in the job, you're doing the job, you're demonstrating value, and it makes it so much easier to transition to a full-time role, at least in the private sector.
Thank you. I see Aaron has a question. I'll just come back to that question. In the spirit of transparency and honesty, which you've both been completely honest and transparent, what would you say are some of the biggest challenges of your role? I know you found fulfillment in helping others and the mentoring piece, but Matt, in your daily role, what are the biggest challenges? What can people expect to understand that is normal, but is part of the job as well? And I'll throw in a part two. What about work-life integration? I know you said in the beginning, the corporate structure was enticing. You at least had a 9 to 5 structure, some sort of structure. Could you speak a little bit about work-life integration, a little bit with the family and things like that?
Yeah, hopefully Joe has some great tips for the latter. Work-life balance is not a thing that I do well, but I'm also one of those folks that I get so much purpose from work. So there's that. I love it. I love being busy. I love taking on more and more and more. But I also feel like because I transitioned at 35 to finally kind of getting an adult job, I feel very behind. And so all of that extra work that I'm putting in, I see as an investment to kind of get to where I want to be in, with my timeline. So things to kind of consider there, but I do think that it can be a challenge when you're considering a family. I will also say that at my previous company, work-life balance was very difficult. At my current firm, it's so easy and everyone's living it. It's woman-led. We have programs. We have an Encore program that brings in women that have been out of the workforce for a while to kind of reintegrate them. So it is a space with a really great culture when it comes to that. There is not even, it's really frowned upon. So I have to be very careful when I'm overworking to not be on anyone's radar. So there are definitely, I think you can find the right fit and the right culture for you. What was the first part of that question again? Sorry.
Yeah, what are some of the biggest challenges you might face? I think maybe we can tag on Megan's question. She just put in the chat box about the guilt that came from transitioning from academia. Usually there's a lot of freedom, intellectual freedom associated with being an academic versus now you are subject to what the corporation wants. So maybe speak to that a little bit if you can.
Yeah, I think, I had challenges just in kind of adjusting to still, I think, the pace of corporate life. As a PhD, I was a very active PhD and I considered myself to be an academic. But it was like, I'm working on 5 or 6 things at any given time. So I'm working a lot, but now all of a sudden I have a bazillion things. And so these basic skills of like to-do lists and follow-up lists and kind of managing people, that was definitely, a big challenge for me. So that was kind of one. In terms of coming over to the dark side, no, I tell everyone, come on over, the water is fine. I have no guilt whatsoever. I also always tell everyone I'm a little bit different from a lot of my friends and colleagues in academia in that my identity was never wrapped up in academia. And so it was okay for me to kind of leave. For a lot of folks, I think that's a challenge. But for me, no, shortly after I transitioned to corporate America, I saw literal dream job for me, tenure track at my alma mater. And I was already in a place where I thought, nope. So even the dream job was not going to lure me back at that point. So I have no guilt whatsoever.
And Joe?
Yeah, so to the challenge question, again, I think Matt alluded to this, right? It's pace and certainly working for a major pharmaceutical company, the sheer size is just, it's mind-boggling, the complexity. The difficult challenge, I'll put it in your context as your trainees, PhDs and postdocs, is time, cost, quality. Like when you're in the academic sector in the government, quality is job one. And you can take a long time to reach that level of quality, right? And the cost is variable, and sometimes you're funded and sometimes you're not, is that right? But in the private sector, it's a different priority. Speed is the most important, time, okay? And you would have to be willing to compromise quality in the name of speed. And that's not something people do easily and adjust to. So I would say that is a real challenge if you're transitioning from that from academia to the private sector. And with regard to work-life integration or work-life harmony, as I call it, I don't believe in balance. It's about trade-offs. It's about opportunity costs and operating in a way that's comfortable for you. At my level, I have the luxury and the privilege really to work and almost choose leaders that align with my values. And as a leader myself, I know that the example I set is going to filter down to my organization. So really, I'm very careful about how I behave and how I balance my work and my life so that they feel that they have the safety to do the same. Okay, really, really important there. Good question.
You know, we're coming up on time, and I think what you have provided to us in this 1 hour was just an in-depth sort of overview of L&D, and then we got into the value space as well. I do want to round it off with Aaron's question. First of all, I encourage everyone who comes to these and takes the time to come to these sessions to please reach out to our panelists on LinkedIn, like connect with them. I'm sure they've done it and it's normal for them to receive messages like this. So Matt and Joe, is it okay if people reach out to you if they have any further like LinkedIn based quick questions?
Of course.
Okay. And so Aaron was asking, how does one, I think I'll ask it more broadly, how does one get a sense of who is hiring for similar positions and what companies to look for? Where do you start?
I think something similar was asked earlier too, like how do you find the roles and who's hiring, and or is L&D a new discipline? It feels new. It's not new. And I think if you look, you're going to find that it's available in every single industry, every single one. And I think as we mature and go again from not just training, but learning, developing, organizational design, et cetera, that this is a strategic objective for most industries and most companies. So I think there's lots of opportunities out there.
Yeah.
And it's really booming since the pandemic. It really is growing. I mean, we're seeing more and more chief learning officers, as Joe had mentioned, right? I mean, before it just used to be the CHR, the chief human resource officer. And to that point, I would also add that this was at least true a couple of years ago. Something like 70% of chief human resource officers come up through L&D. So in many ways, it is one of maybe the most critical area within HR if you want to kind of reach that pinnacle.
With that being said, thank you both so much for your time. I know you're in the middle of work and we appreciate you. So can we give both Joe and Matt a round of applause? I see virtual claps. So thank you again, Joe and Matt. Gian and I will be in touch right after this. Thank you.
That's great.
Our pleasure.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.